How's it going, everybody? This is Pastor Jason Fulmer, and in today's video, we are going to be reading together through the blog post entitled The Faithfulness of the Prophet Nathan. The prophet Nathan is the prophet who delivered the message to King David after King David's sin with Bathsheba, and we are going to be reading from 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. I'm not going to read all the verses there. I'm just giving you the reference, but that's where we're going to be taking today's blog post from. And if you would like to, you can subscribe to my blog at pastorfulmer.com by moving down here and clicking the subscribe button. And that way you'll get the blog post and these videos in your email if you'd like to follow along. Sometimes I make them just a still frame, so you can just listen, and sometimes, like this time, I scroll through the actual blog post and we can read it together. And so the blog post is taken from 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. And again, this is the situation after King David committed his sin with Bathsheba, and about 9 or 10 months later, the prophet Nathan shows up and lets him know that God knows all about it. And so, but let's talk about the faithfulness of the prophet Nathan. How would you define a, quote, faithful person? The wise man Solomon tells us in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 5, a faithful witness will not lie. And again, he says in Proverbs 27 and 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend. And then he asks in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6, a faithful man who can find. It seems that Solomon looked at a faithful person not as someone who faithfully toes the line to stay in good standing and to gain advantage, but as someone who, when it's necessary, is willing to take on great risks to themselves and their reputation in order to speak truth. Not just for the sake of calling things out, but with a much deeper reasoning, the hope of righting some wrong that is creating a negative impact on others. Such a man was the prophet Nathan. What God considers to be faithful and what people consider to be faithful can be two very different things. Nathan was convicted by Jehovah to go and deliver a difficult message to the king. It would be a message that would no doubt be unpopular with those who surrounded the king, and maybe even with the king himself. But Nathan knew the message had to be delivered. So let's talk about Nathan's divine mission. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1, it says, and the Lord sent Nathan unto David. Now notice here that Nathan did not go of his own accord, nor did King David send for him, but it was God himself who sent Nathan on this mission. The king, being the highest position in the land, was probably not used to anyone being so bold and forward with him. He was probably used to platitudes and placating language that would almost guarantee their place in the king's good graces. But Nathan knew his message was ordained by God and therefore feared God alone rather than fearing what the king or anyone else could do to him. We call Nathan faithful, not only because he was faithful to God in delivering this very heavy message when others would have chosen to stay silent, but we call him faithful because he was also faithful to David. When Nathan could have chosen his own self-interest over the will of God, when he could have chosen to go his own way and mind his own business, which in turn would likely have allowed David to incur the wrath of God in a much more severe way, he chose to deliver the message, suffering the possible displeasure of the king, and at least give the king the opportunity to hear from someone rather than letting David remain in ignorance and suffer the consequences. So now you see why we're bringing out how that Nathan was not only faithful to God, he was actually faithful to David, though David may not have known it yet. So let's talk about God's message through Nathan did not happen right away. Now we have to remember that Nathan delivered his message to the king just before the illegitimate child of David and Bathsheba was born. So we're talking about 9 months or so from the time of David's sin with Bathsheba to the time Nathan delivers his message. During this time, there were those around David who knew about his situation. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 3 and 4, it says, and David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her. So right there in verses 3 and 4 of 2 Samuel chapter 11, we find out there were already people who were privy to the situation. Now, we don't read of anyone telling David that his actions were wrong in the eyes of God, or that this action was going to hurt other people. Why not? Maybe it's because they thought the king was out of their reach. Maybe they thought he was too high ranking for them to even be able to say such a thing to. Maybe some feared losing promotional opportunity if they said something. Who knows? Again, what God considers to be faithful and what people consider to be faithful can be two very different things. Even Joab started to realize something was amiss. Consider the following scriptures. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 6. And David sent to Joab, saying, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. And then over in verse 15, and he, David, wrote in the letter to Joab, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And then in chapter 11, verses 20 and 21, this is Joab saying to the messenger that is being sent back to David, And if so be that the king's wrath arise, in verse 21, then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So we see that the error of David had been going on for a while, and others were aware of it and that it was wrong. But only Nathan would have the wherewithal to actually speak up about it, not to harm David, but to help him and all who were affected by his actions. During this 9 months or so, could David play the trumpet and harp with joy unto the Lord? Could he say, With my whole heart have I sought thee, as he would write in Psalms 119, verse 10? Not likely. What a joyless year he must have experienced. So it is when we are fighting against the conviction of God himself. To fight against the only true joy giver is to ensure that no joy is experienced, but rather the slow, painful process of a dying spirit, as I'm sure David must have been experiencing. Nathan understood that reproof, especially of someone who resides at a higher social level, such as King David, should only be presented according to the will of God, not according to who deserves it, nor according to one's own whims. This calling requires careful prayer and consideration before it is carried out, which I'm sure the prophet Nathan did. When Nathan understood this to be the will of God, he humbly obeyed. We do not find that he delivers the message with a spirit of retribution or to attack, but it is delivered in the spirit of duty to the Lord. This way, the response of the king and any possible rejection of those around him would have no bearing on his obedience. Nathan brings this message to a climactic close when he tells David in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 14, Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. In other words, David, it isn't just about you and protecting your image. You have given the enemies of God ammunition, not only to use against you personally, but also to use against what God is trying to do through you. And now our people are suffering and have to work harder to overcome that stigma. So let's talk about David's favorable response. When Nathan told David those famous words in 2 Samuel 12 and 7, where he says, Thou art the man, we don't read of David trying to come up with a reason why he wasn't to blame. He simply said in verse 13, I have sinned against the Lord. When Nathan was tasked to deliver this message, it was never in the heart of God, nor in the heart of Nathan, to try to hurt David. Nathan's faithfulness is found not only in that he delivered a difficult message to the highest ranking person in the land, but also in that he meant it for David's good. Nathan had too much conviction to just let this wrong go on as others seem to have been doing. 2 Samuel 12 and 15, And Nathan departed unto his house. After delivering the message God sent him to deliver, Nathan did not stand around to see if David would take notice of his good intentions and reward him for his bravery and faithfulness to God. David needed Nathan more than he realized. Obeying the Lord was all the reward Nathan needed. He could say, as the prophet Daniel would later say in his generation in Daniel chapter 5, verse 17, "Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another." We can rightly say that the prophet Nathan was a faithful reprover, because he was faithful to God and faithful to the one to whom God sent him. Only the love of God in someone's heart can help them have sympathy and love for someone they must deliver a strong message to, especially if that person is someone they once greatly respected. This site is dedicated to encouraging men and women to walk in a personal relationship with God. And if this article has added value to your life for God, consider subscribing at pastorfulmer.com, or you can click on the link, and subscribing on our YouTube page by clicking the link there as well. Thank you, and God bless you, and we'll see you in the next blog.